everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Food for Thought, a series of interviews EnWave is conducting with business leaders in the food industry, covering everything from consumer packaged goods to food supply chains to product development. The focus of Food for Thought is how we can rethink food in a post-COVID-19 world. Our guest today is Laura Incognito, founder of Little Tucker, a plant-based energy bite company based in Canada. Laura has gone from selling her fresh energy bites in farmers markets to a shelf-stable product on the shelves of over 1,200 stores nationwide, including the likes of Save-On-Foods, Safeway, and Whole Foods, in less than 5 years, and is the epitome of a Canadian success story. Laura was also named to Calgary's Top 40 Under 40 list in 2019. Laura, welcome to Food for Thought, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
So why don't you give us a little bit of background for all the viewers on Little Tucker and where it started from?
How it all began? For sure. So I started Little Tucker when I moved to Canada in 2015. So originally, as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm from Australia. And I basically started Little Tucker because I was at this, crossroads in my life where I really had to try and figure out what it was that I wanted to do. I had a background in journalism and broadcast. So basically when I came to Canada, I found I was in a really tough position. I couldn't get a job because of my accent, and I was basically forced to try and figure out something else that I wanted to do with my life. And for me, what made the most sense was food. I have a huge passion for food, and on top of that, I also have a huge passion for living a really abundant and healthy life. So those two things kind of combined. And I also just identified this gap in the Canadian market where there was really no brand at that time, 5 years ago, that was making a product that was just made from simple foods that were pronounceable and good for you. So I just couldn't really understand why there wasn't any brands doing that. And so I really simply just started making recipes in my own home. It's really interesting. Like I never really had this big idea of creating a brand that would, go nationwide or anything like that. I just thought it would be a bit of fun to sell some product at a farmer's market and get some people's feedback. And people just loved it. So it kind of took off from there. But yeah, it simply began as this kind of little project I had for myself in my kitchen at home and creating recipes and selling them at the local farmers markets in Calgary.
Very cool. So I think now you're in over 1,200 stores nationwide in Canada.
Yeah. It's about that number. So yeah, coast to coast across Canada. We're in some of the major retailers like Save-On-Foods and Safeway, Sobeys, Whole Foods. So yeah, it's definitely expanded beyond what I ever thought it would. So it's really exciting.
Very cool. I kind of want to jump into the product development side. So you kind of had a good segue there. Did you start with a product and say, I want to create a bite and figure out how that was? A bite is fairly unique in the market. Oftentimes we see it in a bar format. So I'm curious to know a little bit about that and if there were any challenges from scaling that part of your business up. And then also, it sounded like you went with a certain target market and then reverse engineered back to the product, or did you start with the product and just say, I want to create something that's plant-based and then figure out who you were going to market it to?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely did things backwards. Like I never really, as I said, I never really set out to create a brand. I never had business experience. I didn't understand how to scale up or that you needed distribution and a sales team. Like I really never knew that. I basically just started from making a product that I really liked and then working backwards from there, because once I realized that people liked this product and I could actually put this on store shelves, there were so many different moving parts that I then had to figure out. And especially for me, like I was really targeting a consumer in Canada that hadn't really been developed yet. I remember all of Little Tucker's products is plant-based, so they're all vegan, they're all gluten-free, they're all completely refined sugar-free, so they're all completely natural. And when I started this 5 years ago and I was selling at farmers markets, people didn't even know what the word vegan meant. So I was really developing a product for a consumer that had only kind of just started developing in Canada. So there was a really big education piece to my product. But yeah, I definitely had to kind of work backwards and figure out a lot of the things by myself, which is why I think it was such a I don't want to say slow, but it was definitely a slower, more organic growth for my company. Like, we weren't really on shelves for the first 3 years that I started this company. Like, we targeted more of those like local fitness studios and smaller cafes and stuff like that. So it was definitely more of a like organic thing that we went through. Because it is only me in the company, and it just physically like took me that long to just try and navigate this industry, because as I said, there are so many different moving parts and it does take a long time. In terms of creating a ball over a bar, that wasn't really anything that was strategic on my behalf. I think it was more so the fact that in Australia, where I'm from, these like energy balls were just everywhere. Like, you go into any cafe, any fitness studio, any place that sells takeaway coffee, and you'll find these really cool like energy balls there that are stuffed with natural ingredients and superfood ingredients. And I personally loved eating them. So when I went to Canada, it was just something that I really missed consuming. And so it was more of like a selfish move on my behalf. But in the long run, it has kind of helped me because I did create a product that was different to every other bar that was on the shelf. So it was just kind of a bit of a point of difference. So it ended up being something that was really cool, but definitely not something that I realized would create so many products, so many problems for me in terms of manufacturing, because manufacturing a bowl in comparison to a bar is much more complex and hands-on and labor-intensive and more expensive. So looking back now, I definitely didn't realize those things going in, but we've made it work.
Okay, very interesting. So with the ball itself, what was the most difficult part of going from a product that you sold essentially fresh at, let's say, a farmer's market to now a consumer packaged good that, you build inventory, it's being sold on multiple sides of the country? How'd you go about making it shelf stable?
Mm-hmm. So that process happened probably about 3 years into the business. As I said at the beginning, I was selling kind of just locally and online, and they were refrigerated, and I think they had like a 2-week shelf life. So about 3 years into the business, I realized the potential of Little Tucker, and I think I sat down and kind of thought about where I wanted to take this. And for me, that was grocery stores. But grocery stores have certain requirements of products like mine, and that is they basically won't put your product on the shelf unless you have a minimum, I think it's 6 months, maybe 9 months shelf life. So that was a huge problem for me because I had a 2-week shelf life. So I had to kind of figure out what it was that I needed to do in order to take my product from a 2-week shelf life to a 9-month shelf life. So that basically required me working with food scientists and tweaking my product. Luckily for me, that didn't require too many tweaks. For me, it was basically just decreasing the amount of moisture that was in my product. So we couldn't add water anymore, which is what we typically did, and just tweaking the recipe in that way. But it's definitely, it's an interesting process, and it's something that a lot of people who start products like mine don't consider at the beginning. So now when I give people advice, it is always like, where do you want to take this product? Because make sure you're making those steps at the very beginning rather than 3 years in, so that you don't have to kind of recreate your product from scratch. But yeah, it's a process that involves working with people who have a lot more knowledge about the science of food than I do. So I kind of had to start outsourcing all of that. Mm-hmm. And then it's the concern of, will the product change dramatically? Will this change the quality of my product? Will this change the taste of my product? So there's a lot of kind of aspects that you have to consider. So yeah, I kind of always recommend thinking about that at the beginning rather than 3 years into your business.
Yeah.
But you live and learn.
There you go. The life of an entrepreneur. Was
exactly.
it difficult?
Pivoting.
Yeah, exactly. That's you got to learn how to micro pivot. Was it difficult to go about maintaining your integrity as a brand of preservative free, no extra fillers? That might have been the easy way to make it shelf stable, because you're using all natural ingredients. Was that an added thing that you kind of had to pivot around, or how did that work?
Yeah. It's interesting because I remember speaking to the food scientists at the beginning and having to kind of explain to them, like, no, like we can't use any fillers, we can't use any preservatives, because I just think that they were kind of like, well, if you want to make it shelf stable, then you just add this in like everyone else out there. But I was very adamant in saying, like, no, like I'm not using any additional ingredients than what I'm already using. We just have to figure out a way of using those ingredients that we're already using in a different way, because there was no way that I was going to change like the ethics behind my brand. Like I wasn't going to completely pivot and become this brand that I'd worked so hard to not be. So as I said, luckily for me, getting my product shelf stable only required small tweaks. But if it had required something more major than that, and including preservatives, I wouldn't have done it. Like I probably would have remained as a product that just had a short shelf life, and it would have limited where I would have been able to sell at. But yeah, no, that was the whole reason why I created Little Tucker. It was a brand that didn't use any ingredients that you couldn't pronounce, and there was no way that I was going to change that.
Okay, interesting. And the balls themselves, are they baked? Are they raw? Are they dehydrated? Can you give some insight on?
They're all completely raw. So there's no like heat added at all. All of the products that we use are basically in their complete natural state. So it's like very simple ingredients. It's dates, it's nuts, it's dried fruits, it's coconut, it's superfood ingredients. It's all things that are completely natural. There's been no refinements made to them. There's been no heat added to them. So yes, it's a completely raw product.
Very nice. One thing I liked on your website is behind each flavor of Energy Bite, there were the actual raw ingredients sort of splashed behind the product themselves. And I think it would be an interesting dichotomy if there was ever some sort of regulations from a marketing perspective, from a food safety and marketing perspective. There's a lot of processed foods out there that people wouldn't want to know what goes into their ingredients, whereas yours, it's very transparent. Everything you see, like you said, is raw, it's natural. In your case, it's plant-based. How did that come about for you, and just being really true to your roots basically as a brand?
I will say first that like consumers always find it really interesting because big brands are really good at marketing themselves as a healthy option. And I remember when I first started Little Tucker, like just going down the grocery aisle and picking up like, I'm not going to drop any names, but picking up those like bars and everything that we've been consuming for so many years that are kind of marketed to us as like a sports bar or a nutrition bar or a healthy option. And if you actually flip over the ingredients, you'll see that there's like 30 different ingredients that go into these things, and 80% of them you can't even pronounce. And so I think consumers are kind of like shocked when you actually put in front of them a list of the ingredients that go into that bar, and then a list of what goes into Little Tucker, because it literally is like, it's ingredients that you know and you can envision. It's an almond, it's a date, it's coconut, it's chia seeds, whatever it is. Like they can actually understand what that ingredient is. So yeah, as I said, like from the very beginning, I wanted Little Tucker to be a brand that uses pronounceable ingredients. I feel like, especially right now, like there's enough confusion out there. And I didn't understand why people weren't just making things simple. Like, why were they making things so complex and so difficult? Why not use just ingredients that are from the earth, are easy to use, are simple to pronounce, taste good? And so, yeah, that's kind of what I've always just stuck with. There's no reason to be adding in fillers and preservatives and all this unnecessary sugar when we can just be using completely natural ingredients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, that's resonated really well with the consumer and why your product, I mean, you've said it's been taken a long time, but, I think in the span of less than 5 years, you've gone from farmers markets to the largest supermarket chains in the country. So I'm sure it's felt like a long time. On the shelf stable piece, when you say it had to go to 6 months or 9 months, did you actually have to wait that long to test your product, or are there ways that you can not circumvent, but to fast track that to see if your product would actually last that long?
There's two ways of doing it. It just kind of depends what kind of product you have. So there's a fast track way of doing it where they basically test it in elevated heating, or they test it in real time. My product was considered a high risk product of going moldy, turning bad, whatever it is. And so we couldn't do the fast track. We basically had to establish what shelf life do you want. For me, it was 9 months. And then they tested it every single week because they wanted to basically find out on a week-to-week basis, when will it go bad? So we ended up testing for 12 months. And at the end of 12 months, it's not that anything went bad. It wouldn't make you sick. It's just that the quality dropped, the coloring changed and all the rest of it. But to kind of, so we got to 12 months safely, but to kind of keep it at a point where the quality was still good, I brought it back down to 9 months. But yeah, we had to wait 9 months for it to be tested and find those results, which was incredibly frustrating. But what I'm learning in this industry is that nothing happens as quickly as you think it will, and to just expect things to take a long time, because unfortunately that's just the way it is. But yeah, it was an interesting process.
The roller coaster ride of an entrepreneur. I think that's really interesting insight that people, whether they're entrepreneurs out there themselves watching this, that are looking at creating a shelf-stable version of a product that they might like, or even just the average consumer understanding what goes into the food they eat. Because I think the situation that we're in right now with COVID-19, a lot of people have a lot more time to read the backs of the food they're eating. They're taking the time to eat at home and try different things at the grocery store. I know I certainly have of different products that I wouldn't normally buy, but you're not in such a rush to get through the grocery store. So I'm sure that a few more people will be interested to try your products. Maybe you can give the consumers a little bit more idea of what you started with and now how many different versions you have.
Yeah. Little Taco has gone through so many different pivots. When I first started, we actually did like raw cakes, and energy balls has been something that I did from the very beginning, but it was more so like desserts that I did. So it was like cakes and brownies, and those products had a very, very short shelf life. So I kind of scrapped those from the very beginning and started going with these energy balls. And then I started realizing that there are so many options for like snacks on the market, but not a lot of options for like healthy indulgences. So something that you can eat that's more of a dessert that is still made from completely natural ingredients that you don't have to feel guilty about. So then we started making these kind of like a chocolate bar. We have one right now that's called the Snickeroo Square, that's basically made from like nut butter and dates and raw chocolate and a date caramel, and that's meant to be more of like a healthy indulgence. We made salads at one stage. We made wraps at one stage. Like we were supplying to food service cafes and all the rest of it. But yeah, it's kind of done so many different pivots. But what we've landed on right now is we have 4 flavors of energy balls that we offer. And then we also have this Snickeroo Square, which is meant to be more of that healthy dessert. And this year, the plan was, and hopefully still is, but more towards the end of this year, is to move more into that healthy indulgence line. But yeah, those are kind of the offerings that we have right now. So it's kind of this mixture of Little Tucker is, we offer like plant-powered and really healthy functional snacks, but then we also offer really healthy and delicious indulgences as well.
Okay. What would some of the ingredients be in your product that you're most proud of, or that you are, think are going to be maybe become a household name now, and a company like yours might be on the forefront of that? I know there's obviously everything's all natural, but what are some ingredients that people might read on the back of your label and wonder, what is this?
Yeah, for sure. And I always get really excited because I feel like when I first started out, I started incorporating these superfoods that have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and incorporating those into the product. So things like maca powder and lucuma powder, and then even down to things like chia seeds and flax seeds and hemp seeds. Those 5 years ago really weren't ingredients that were like commercially sold at the grocery store. So even like looking at that and seeing that you can buy all those ingredients at the grocery store now, like that to me makes me really excited, because I never wanted this to be like a really like niche product. I wanted this to be like a product that people can consume every single day comfortably. Like I wanted to make these superfoods more of like a household name, because I know at the beginning, when you kind of said to someone, this is an energy ball that has all these different superfood powders and seeds in it, that could be really intimidating for people. So one of the ingredients that I'm most proud about is lucuma, which is an ingredient that's grown in kind of like Central South America. And it's amazing. So it's basically a fruit It looks, I guess you would kind of describe it mostly like a mango, but in North America, we consume it as more of a powder form. But it's a natural sweetener, so it kind of resembles like a caramel maple syrup malty kind of flavor, and people can put it in their like coffee as a sweetener and their smoothies to give it a caramel flavor. But I absolutely love it. I use it every single day. It's full of like B3 vitamins, and it's really, really good for your hair and your skin and your nails. And it tastes really good. And so our salted caramel energy ball is basically made from lucuma. So people kind of always ask, like, because it taste exactly like caramel, and reading the ingredients, people don't really understand where the caramel flavor is coming from. But yeah, it's coming from the lucuma. So it's a really like interesting and delicious ingredient that is maybe one of the ingredients that we use that hasn't really become super mainstream just yet.
Mm-hmm. Is it, being a Canadian snack company, is it at all harder to get your hands on any of these superfoods that often come from faraway parts of the world? Or now, like you said, the market's developed enough that there's, avenues and ways to get your hands on these ingredients in bulk?
Yeah, a lot of the ingredients aren't accessible in Canada, which is a shame. Like I would love to be able to source my ingredients locally. Unfortunately, that's just not the case because we just don't have the climate for a lot of the ingredients that I use. But they are grown quite abundantly in the Central South Americas, and so I haven't had any issues so far in terms of like supply chain. Maybe that is because a lot of North American brands aren't using these ingredients, and so there is kind of a lot of them. I don't know if they start becoming even more and more mainstream, that they could very well become harder to get our hands on, or the price of them will increase. But right now, I don't think that there's a lot of people that are using them, and so there is quite an abundance of them.
Okay. And is your plan with Little Tucker? I mean, obviously now it's a challenging time for all businesses, but are you looking to take it outside of Canada into the US or other markets? Are you already there, or focus on Canada for the time being?
Mm-hmm. Working on it. The States is definitely somewhere that I would love to expand into, especially that West Coast clientele. We were kind of hoping that 2021 would be the year that we did expand. We'll obviously have to see how things are going right now. I think what a lot of people, consumers, and maybe other small businesses don't understand is the financial backing that it takes in order to be able to launch into a big market like the US. So yeah, it's definitely something that's on the cards. It's definitely something that we're working on. Hopefully sometime in the near future. And then I would also love to bring it back to my home, back to Australia. I think it's a brand that people back here will obviously, sorry, I say back here because I'm currently in Australia, that they will resonate with, especially with the name. Tucker actually in Australia basically is a slang word that means food. So the word Tucker is kind of thrown around all the time here. And so I think people down here will resonate with it a lot. So yeah, I'd say that the US and Australia are kind of the two that we're targeting.
Okay. What would you say to, I mean, you've gone from a small scale entrepreneur now to running a national brand. What would you say to an entrepreneur that's looking to bring a product to market and looking at the different channels of how they should go about, distribution from a direct to consumer versus grocery store versus convenience store? Do you have to kind of hit every way up and build, that following for your product? Or, I think we're going to start to see a lot more D2C now, for good or for bad, with a lot more things moving to that platform, just with the situation that we're in now and the emergence of Amazon and different brands. How would you go about, talking to somebody that might have a great idea, whether it's a bar or, something of that nature?
Mm-hmm. I can only kind of speak to like my journey and how I did it, which I personally think is the way to go. I always recommend to do things in a very like focused way. So I think that if you have this idea that you're going to create a product and then just explode it into every kind of avenue and market out there, that's just simply not the way it happens unless you have a lot of money to do so. So the way I would say to do it, and the way I did it, would be to just kind of focus on smaller markets that you want to target first, so that you can really build up that brand recognition and clientele. Because it's one thing to get your product on the shelf, it's another thing to move it off the shelf. So if you get your product on a shelf, but no one really like recognizes the brand, no one really knows what it is, if they're not really that inclined to pick up your product over another one that they've been buying for the past 10 years, then your product simply isn't going to move. So the way I did it was I started small. Like I started at farmers markets, and then when I built up traction there and realized that this product had potential to actually sell, then I started testing it at fitness studios and local cafes, and then demand grew from there. And then I moved to the more like independent organic grocery stores in Calgary. And then once I realized that it was moving there, then I moved to the mainstream like grocery store chains. It definitely wasn't. And then from there, I only stayed in Alberta for probably a good 6 months to a year. And then I expanded outside of Alberta to BC. And then once it was working in BC, then I moved to Ontario. So it definitely, I took it in stages. It definitely wasn't the kind of thing where I started making these energy balls and then started targeting commercial grocery stores right away. Because as I said, quite often, for some brands it does work, quite often it doesn't though. There's so many things that go into selling your product at a grocery store, from listing fees. Like I just think a lot of people realize that you actually have to pay quite often, between $10,000 to $100,000 to get your product on a shelf. And that simply isn't doable when you're first starting out. So you really kind of have to go through those like building blocks to get to that stage. I feel like so many brands concentrate on the amount of doors that they're in. That really doesn't matter. What matters more is being in a more like focused, smaller amount of stores and getting higher turns in those stores, rather than like spreading yourself thin, getting into 2,000 stores, but not actually selling any product. So yeah, be strategic about it. It's really exciting when you kind of get the announcement that you're in 200 new doors, but that might not mean anything if you can't actually get your products to sell.
Mm-hmm. When approaching the grocery stores, or whether they approach you, is it a really difficult process in terms of rigorous testing of your product and taste panels, or are the grocery stores very receptive to the products initially? Or, I'm sure there's some entrepreneurs out there interested in just how they might even navigate that space.
Yeah, it totally depends on the stores. What I've found when you're kind of pitching your product to a store is that more often than not, they care about your story. They care about the person behind the brand, and they're banking on you more than they're banking on your product. Obviously, you do have to have a product that they like as well, but they want to meet the maker, and they want to hear your story. They want to hear your why, and they want to hear how hard you're going to work for them to sell your product for them. But the actual process of pitching your product to a store, it depends. Like for me, example, for the first 4 years of my business, it was me kind of knocking on doors and speaking to buyers and getting them to try it and telling them my story and getting comfortable with people turning you down. Now I kind of have a sales team that helps me out a lot with that, because you will get to a stage where you're targeting grocery stores that won't speak to me directly. For example, Whole Foods, I wasn't able to get a meeting with a buyer in Whole Foods. It's just kind of not how they work. And so you have to go through a broker. So now I have brokers and I have a sales team who will kind of get those meetings for me. And I am still involved in the process. Like I can still go to those meetings and be with my broker kind of selling my product to them. But sometimes it's not the case where you can kind of sell your story and your product directly to the buyer. You kind of have to have that middleman that helps you out.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Do you think that the situation we're in with COVID-19, do you think it'll change, or how it might change consumer preferences in terms of, what the consumers are looking for when they walk into a grocery store? I mean, we don't even know what the future of a grocery store looks like now that, there's glass walls, and, the last couple of years, it's been a big investment in making them as user friendly as possible. And now, people, keep your distance. Have you thought about that at all in terms of your brand, or just where the food market's going to shift?
Yeah, I think what a lot of brands like mine are having to start realizing is that this could very well be the new norm. Like, I feel like right now people have the mindset of, well, this will end in 3 months and then everything will go completely back to how it was before. And that could very well and more than likely not be the case. So I think we're really having to look at, like, okay, what are consumers doing right now? So they're buying online, they're buying locally, they're opting for like the curbside pickup and kind of not wanting to actually like physically go into the grocery stores anymore. And those are things that people weren't doing before because maybe they weren't necessarily comfortable doing that. Like they wanted the option of going in and picking the produce themselves. But maybe now that they are kind of going down that road and seeing how easy it is and how much, time it's giving them in their day, they're more than likely going to stick with those options. So I think brands like me are having to kind of really reassess and think about that this could be our new norm moving forward, even post-virus. For my product especially, like my product is more of an impulse buy. So, it's not really something that people put on their shopping list and specifically go to the store to buy. It's more of a product that when they're walking around the grocery store and walking down the aisles, they'll pick up and put in their cart. So what I'm having to figure out right now is, okay, if more people post-COVID aren't going to be just wandering around the grocery store like they used to, and they're just going in and out to get their essentials, or they're buying online, what is it that I can be doing right now to ensure that my product is something that they're still thinking about? So yeah, I'm having to pivot a lot, and I'm having to go more like straight to consumer, which I never really did in the past. I was always a B2B business, never really a B2C. So there's definitely a lot of pivots and things I'm having to think about of, I'm going to have to change some things in case things don't go back to the way that they were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's some really unique insight. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs out there are realizing that there might not be, entrepreneurs and businesses alike, that the new normal is not going to be the old normal.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. From a perspective of who's kind of helped, champion your brand or helped you along, is there anybody in the Canadian food industry that's kind of been a role model for you, or that's helped, you just look up to as to how they've grown their brands and their products?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many. I mean, I can't speak enough about how important mentorship has been for me, and having those brands that I look up to and admire. But they're not even other brands, just like people in general who I admire and have continued to push me. I'm just trying to remember 2, maybe 3 years ago, I created a partnership with Arlene Dickenson through her Accelerator program in Calgary. And that for me has been instrumental, not just in the contacts that she's been able to give me or her expertise in the industry, but just her as a person and her as a female person in our community who's been able to do so much and inspire so many people. Just having that person to look up to just push you all the time has been instrumental for me. But yeah, I mean, there's so many brands out there who have kind of been on this journey with me. Drizzle, Heritage Roasting Company, who I've kind of worked alongside. And yeah, they've just helped so much. It's just that feeling of being a part of a community is what kind of pushes you on those days where being an entrepreneur isn't fun and is really tough. You just need to surround yourself by people who are kind of in the trenches with you and will continuously kind of push you to just keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thrilled last week to see when Arlene announced her $100 million new fund she just raised. I mean, I think COVID is really shining a light on the Canadian food and agricultural technology sector. And you're kind of wondering, who's going to be able to champion it and fund it when, so many people have, lost 30-40% of their, net worth or savings accounts, investments. And it was awesome to see somebody like that who's already been a champion for a lot of brands, especially in the food and beverage space. And I think she'll continue to pioneer that. And I know, from EnWave's perspective, that's really exciting because, we're working with innovative CPG brands that that want to bring innovative products to market that you haven't necessarily seen. And it takes people like that who are willing to back entrepreneurs that have these great ideas. And, a lot of people are worried about that, sort of startup community. So it's great to hear.
Yeah, I think she's done such a good job of making a lot of Canadian consumers realize that all the products and farming and everything we need is done within our nation, and it's not necessary to kind of look to other places that are exporting to kind of get everything we need. And I think she's just really shifted the focus to buy locally and support Canadian small businesses and support our economy. And I think she's just done a fantastic job of doing that.
Absolutely. I guess we'll wrap up now, but any sort of final thoughts just on COVID and little Tucker and, words of wisdom for any other business owners out there like yourselves that are, having to get scrappy and pivot and.
Yeah, I think it's just, it's a really interesting and weird time. And it's a time that a lot of us business owners obviously never kind of expected to be in. But I think it's important to just kind of look at this as an opportunity to magnify your message and just kind of go back to your first reasons of why you started the company and what impact you actually wanted to make. And just have a really genuine message that you're spreading throughout your community. I know for me, for example, now that I don't kind of handle my own production and I outsource things like distribution and some of my marketing, it's now, and the circumstances that we're in now, it's actually given me some downtime to rediscover the passion that I have in my brand, because I feel like, when you're busy, you get so tied up in the day-to-day of just making your company run and day-to-day operations. And when that's kind of taken away from you, you're left with what you're actually passionate about. So for me, it's creating a lot of content, and it's, reaching out to consumers directly. And it's all those things that I didn't have time for a month ago that I'm now able to kind of sit with. And for me, it's actually been a huge reset of, my ethics and why I started the business in the first place. So I think a lot of businesses just need to look at this as an opportunity to just kind of get back to the grassroots and rediscover your branding and just turn this into a positive somehow.
Absolutely. I like that. Magnify your message in your community. I think that can go for any brand, food related or not. I think, this whole thing is really making people reevaluate their priorities in life, the companies that they work for, and just how they want to show up every day. So that's a great one.
I think us food brands are so fortunate right now in that so many people have lost their jobs. So many industries have literally fizzled out and died right now. And the food industry is one that hasn't. So we're in a really unique position right now to actually be able to make a difference and help and spread positive messaging and donate or whatever it is that we can be doing. We're in a really unique position to actually be able to do that when a lot of people right now can't. So use it wisely, I would say.
There you go. So where can people find, maybe just, find you direct to consumer on Instagram? Where can people find your product?
So you can buy it directly from the website, which is just littletucker.ca. You can follow us on socials. We're huge on Instagram, I'd say is probably the biggest one. But if you are kind of doing your groceries online right now, you can buy Little Tucker from there. So places like well.ca and Spud, and a lot of your local grocery stores are actually doing deliveries. So places like, I believe, Safeway and Save on Foods and all the rest are doing home delivery. So you can buy us online there. But yeah, if you wanted to buy directly from us, the website would be the best place to go.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time, Laura. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.